Hello and welcome to The Future is Spoken, produced by the Digital Assistant Academy. This show accompanies the Digital Assistant Academy's course entitled Voice Interaction Design. Voice will soon become a common interface for every digital device. For consumer-facing industries, voice will significantly reshape customer relationships and lift corporate productivity, accessibility, and inclusion. But what started as the world's fastest adopted consumer technology may fall well short of its potential for acceptance and enterprise value. Research points to a trust gap that raises critical questions of privacy, data security, ease of use, brand protection, interoperability, and equal and unbiased access for individual and organizational users alike. A proven way to close the trust gap, one pursued in the early days of other technologies, is through collaborative development and adoption of standards and usage guidelines. In today's episode, Shyamala Praga speaks with Jon Stine on the need for standardizing voice experiences. Jon Stine is the Executive Director of the Open Voice Network, OVN, a non-profit global association dedicated to bringing the benefit of standards to the world of artificial intelligence-enabled voice assistants. The OVN is a directed fund of the Linux Foundation. He brings to this role more than 30 years of global leadership in the commerce and technology industries. Jon's retail industry knowledge was first shaped in the womenswear apparel business, as he headed sales of a well-known national brand to leading U.S. department and specialty stores. In 2000, he joined the Intel Corporation to create and head its first global outreach to the retail and consumer goods industry. In the years that followed, he was a co-founder of the Metro Group Future Store Initiative in Germany, and the Pan-Pearl River Delta Initiative first brought digital transparency to the Chinato U.S. supply chain. He joined Cisco Systems' retail CPG consulting team in late 2006 and later headed Cisco's North America consulting practice for retail CPG. In 2014, he returned to Intel as the Global Enterprise Sales General Manager for the retail, hospitality, and consumer goods industries. He stepped away from Intel in 2019 to build the Open Voice Network. For the years, Jon has worked directly with customers across the Americas, Western and Central Europe, Middle East, India, China, and Japan, and delivery partners in hardware, software, services, and consulting. He resides in Portland, Oregon, USA. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to The Future is Spoken. Today I have a very special guest, Jon Stine from Open Voice Network, and we are going to talk about standardizing the voice experiences. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you, Shyamala. Appreciate it.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So Jon, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and where you come from?
Oh, I'd be glad to. Started my career, my professional career in the retail business, in the apparel business, and did that for about 15 years. And then around year 2000, the time of the great internet boom and bust, was brought on board by the Intel Corporation to help figure out and help create their first outreach into the retail and consumer goods communities. Did that for 7 years, had the distinct privilege of working worldwide, went to Cisco Systems, and then in 2014 went back to Intel, and in 2016 found myself discussing this voice thing. What is this voice thing and what is it going to mean?
Right.
And from there, one thing led to another into the Open Voice Network.
That's an amazing journey from where you started to all of a sudden. 2014, I think, was a big year for voice because Alexa was launched, and then so much changed after Alexa that the expectation for people also changed. And I think a lot of startups, a lot of third-party companies and companies, who develop skills also evolved during that period as well. So could you tell us a little bit more, like how and why did the idea of Open Voice Network come to you?
Well, there was a group of us. I had some friends at MIT, and there were a group of us met in a coffee shop off Massachusetts Avenue. And I had some meetings in the afternoon, and I thought we would talk about the weather. We might talk about the Red Sox. That's what they always talk about in Boston, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, one of the professors said, it'd be interesting to go around the table. What will be the technology that will most reshape the relationship between consumers and patients and clients, individuals, and the entities that work with them? between a shopper and a retailer, between a patient and a provider, between a client and a financial services advisor. And we all kind of scratched our head. And, you can imagine, Shamal, at that time, what are the technologies du jour, right? Oh, well, AR, VR, or IoT, or, AI, or big data, you talk about all those things. And I looked around and I said, well, this voice thing, this Alexa thing, this is really going to, this could really change things. And we talking about, the power of just saying yes, the power of simply saying yes. And what, the combination of Amazon and Alexa and Amazon Prime, and it was like, oh my goodness. Well, it wasn't, Shamala, we didn't finish coffee before we had agreed to do a research project.
Wow.
And got some money from Intel, got some funding. Capgemini Consulting came in, and let's explore this. Let's even begin to ask the questions of where this might go in consumer-facing industries. One thing led to another, and again, it's a long story, but it led to the question of, well, this is kind of the wild, wild west, this whole voice thing. It's kind of similar to the days of the browser wars back in the internet. It's kind of the early days of mobile. It's
right.
Gosh, this is going to
What
be
an
very
incredible journey. What an incredible journey. This is so fascinating, like over coffee you were discussing something completely off topic, and then the idea of open voice network came. And definitely I feel like, maybe part of the reason is because this field is so evolving, like smartphones, like you mentioned. And I can think about, how the evolution of user experience happened. Like when I started, it was called usability engineering and human factors engineering and human machine interfaces and interactions and all sorts of things. Only until, like, I think 2009 or 2010 was when officially user experience term was coined and a process was streamlined. By before that, everything was all over the place. And what you are trying to do is pretty much something similar, where you're trying to standardize the entire voice system, which is great. So could you talk a little bit more about why do you think the standards are so important for us?
I could talk, Shamala, I could talk a lot about the value of standards. I could talk, I'm not a technologist by training, but, talk a little bit about technology. But I think the central issue, and it's something that you and I have talked about, is the trust of users. Can you trust this technology if you're an individual user? Can you trust it to understand you? Can you trust it to protect your privacy? Can you trust it to work to your benefit as opposed to the benefit of somebody else? And if you're an enterprise user, from the CEO to the senior legal advisors to, retail merchants or others, or in your position, can you trust it to use your data appropriately? Are you at risk? All these questions that, when you boil them down, are all questions of trust. And we were looking around, and one of my colleagues, I'm not smart enough to come up with these things, but said, this is about making voice worthy of user trust. And standards are one of the things that can do that. One of the things, but a very important, to kind of bring a kind of a rule of law where we know how the game is to be played. We know what's right, what's wrong. Generally, we're given guidelines. Standards do that and help us work together. And so it was, how do we make voice worthy of user trust? Is the theme, the major theme of the Open Voice Network, but it's really been the calling card, the reason for doing this.
I like it. You are taking a very user-centered approach in first place, and putting trust as your focal point for everything, which is really important. And you mentioned a very important point here, like if we have standards, everything falls in place. People will start to follow it, and I think now more than ever it is required as we start looking at Amazon, Google, or other voice assistants out there. There's so much difference, even in the development, and we spoke about this so many times, right? Even in the development environment, the terms they use, Alexa calls it skill, Google calls it action, Samsung calls it capsule. So everyone is using a different term for a voice application. So what you said really, makes sense. How do you think that when we are talking about all of these terminologies, these are more from a developer. So when you say user trust, who is the user? Are those the consumers? Are those the developers? Are those the enterprise? So what would you define as the user of this entire system?
Well, I'll be a little smart alecky here, and I'd say the answer is yes. It's the individual at the core of it. It has to be the individual. You know, I'm reminded often. I went to Intel in the year 2000. That's the beginning of the internet. You know, the big internet boom. And one of the first things I was asked to do, I'm coming in from the outside, was to write a paper on the question, will women ever use the internet to shop?
Interesting topic.
Because there was this sense that, well, male engineers might use the internet because they're geeky, but women don't trust the internet. You know, you can steal your credit card. They don't trust you'll get it. You know, this whole issue of trust. Will women use the internet? I mean, I still have the paper, and it seems so ridiculous today, but it's indicative of, so we start with the individual. But I think it's also maybe the second constituency of users, Shamala, is the enterprise decision makers. Will voice be a tool that helps them make money? Will voice be a tool that helps them raise revenues and cut costs? Is voice, when you look at the zero-sum game of post-COVID marketing budgeting, are you going to spend money on voice, or are you going to spend money on something else? Is it trustworthy? And then certainly for the entire wonderful developer, designer, strategist, testing UX community who are now struggling with, well, I got to do this for Google. I got to go do this for Amazon. I got to go do this for Samsung. And oh my goodness, I want to do something for Baidu. And what about Ali? And the Magenta just came out. It's how do we make it trustworthy? And so to a degree, it's flipping the paradigm. Standards can flip the paradigm from where it is to having it user-centric, making it easy, better, safer, smarter for the users and all those users.
That's a very good example which you gave, which brings me to another question. If I look at standards, for me, it's some sort of, so for example, let's take accessibility as an example. Like there are so many people who cannot use technology because of any kind of situational or any kind of physical disabilities. And many of them are still deprived because companies are not aware or because companies do not invest in it. And now all of a sudden there are some regulations, government has created ADAs, and then, like accessibility acts and all of those things. And now companies are forced to do it. So now what has happened is more than a desire to do something, it has become a regulatory thing for companies to start doing. Do you feel like this is where we are heading with Open Voice Network, or do you feel it's the other way around?
It's kind of a combination of both, and it's a great question, and it's a great issue to raise. There will be, and I think will always be a necessity for some level of regulation, and you can take a look at disabled communities or underserved communities. Oftentimes regulation is needed simply to ensure that they are served. At the same time, I think it's part of the Open Voice Network, and let's take the issue of inclusivity of language, for instance. I speak Midwestern Cincinnati TV and with a baritone. So the odds of me being understood by some of the major platforms, most of the major platforms, at least North American, is very high. If I spoke with it in a different way, at a different tone, different pitch, different dialect, etc., that would drop substantially. The Open Voice Network can help provide the tools for enterprises and others who want to reach all of their customers. I mean, Shamala, in your work at Ford, you want to reach all of Ford's customers, not just guys who sound like John, And so how can we, and it's to be determined, We have a very high level roadmap, but it's to be determined how can we assist companies such as Ford and others to meet the accessibility and inclusivity. Perhaps there are tools we can develop. Perhaps there are data sets we can develop. That's been a discussion. Perhaps there are other things that we can develop that can assist you and make it easier for companies like yours to meet the needs of underserved communities and to increase the inclusivity of voice.
That's a great vision to have. And I feel like the future for Open Voice Network is definitely very, very great.
Well,
I'm
thank you.
looking forward and excited
so.
about this thing. You brought up inclusivity. How about ethics? There are so many issues when we talk about voice assistant nowadays. And ethics is a very, very important topic, at least in my opinion. So let me give you an example, right? The other day we were doing throwdown, digital assistant throwdown, and then we were just asking random questions. And all of a sudden we asked different voice assistants like, hey, my boyfriend hits me. So we asked Alexa, Google, and Siri as well. Now, Siri was like, I'm sorry, I do not understand. I don't understand when you say my boyfriend hits me. Alexa was like, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. And then Google was a little like conscious about what the user asked. And it was like, here's some domestic violence related articles for you. So every company is doing whatever is making sense to them, right? Where do you feel? And this for me is an ethical thing. It could be about inappropriate conversations. It could be about any such depression related questions or domestic violence related questions which users may have, or companionship. So where does the ethics fall in, and where does open voice networks role comes in?
It's a great question, and it's, as you know better than I know, it's a very difficult question. The issue of ethical use and what do we do with, and we have talked about what happens, we hear a gunshot. What do we do? I think there's several things the Open Voice Network, and domestic violence, anger, any of these things that we may be hearing in a home environment or even a work environment, any environment, and knowing that voice is such a multi-layered, rich set of data. There's several things I think the Open Voice Network can and must do. Right now, we are working on, and you've been a wonderful part of this, and I'm so grateful for your leadership in this. But colleagues, a first draft of a paper on voice-specific privacy, and we have two teams that within the Open Voice Network that are working on this issue. Really, it's what do we do with the data? How do we protect it? And what values might we promote? And we have a technical team that has been working on this. How might we manage voice-specific data given the guidance from, say, GDPR or CCPA, NIST, and this entire enormous, wonderful body of literature? There's another group that maybe it's kind of the liberal arts college, the philosophers group that's been meeting, and they're asking the same kind of questions, but from a different perspective. And it's what would be the right thing to do if we heard domestic violence or a gunshot? We heard a parent, what sounds like hitting a child, something awful. What are the responsibilities of voice, or those who are providing? Or let's say it's a private conversation between a retailer and a consumer. Gunshot goes off.
Yeah.
What are the responsibilities? And it's unexplored territory, but it's something we intend to be exploring. We know we have to, on behalf of the community, on behalf of the voice technology, just at least, if nothing else, Shamal, I think to be recommending guidelines and to be taking those around to many different observers and ethical advisors, and to say, yeah, I think this probably could be a right thing. It's in our roadmap to be exploring those kind of things.
Yeah, I think like that is an important topic, definitely. And, good that Open Voice Network is thinking about those kind of things as well. The other thing, which always I keep wondering about is the inappropriate conversation. At what stage do we decide like this conversation is appropriate versus inappropriate? For example, if you ask Alexa to fart, it does. Now, if you ask her to smile, she'll smile. If you ask her to sing, she will sing. She'll do all sorts of things. When do we say this is the boundary? So
I'm nodding my head, and I'm not speaking here because again it's such a difficult question, but
right,
it's such a critical question. And as you know, and all of our developers who are listening in on here, everyone is dealing with this. It's a question that no one likes to bring up in polite company, but thank you for bringing it up. But everyone must deal with it. Hey Alexa, do this. How do we respond to that? And is it an element of privacy? If this is said 50 times, does it become a larger issue? We don't know. We simply don't know. I mean, every company has its own policies and is doing certain things. Alexa farts, but Alexa doesn't do this, and Google might do this, and etc. Might there be some guidelines? I think so, but it's going to be it's a very difficult topic. But again, it's one we can't shy away from. We cannot shy away from. Some of our volunteer members, and we have, as you know, Shamala, we have more than 180 different independent designers and developers who are participating one way or another, and it's a wonderful community, are asking, gosh, should there be some movie-like rating for content to protect children?
right.
Should there be, if someone wants to pursue X-rated conversations with Alexa, within the privacy of their own home, is that something by common consent? How do we do that? We don't know. But again, it's one of those critical questions, as you're bringing up here, that we need as an industry to address. If we don't address it, someone else will, who is not as aware of the technology as we might be, and who is not as committed to the success of the technology and its all value for the enterprise as we are.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid point. But do you think, like, for some of these things, there has to be other people outside of voice industry also involved? For example, psychologists or criminal psychologists or people who understand it from a different standpoint, which we do not understand. And should companies be, investing their time, effort, and money to hire these kind of people and make them process part of the process? And is that something, Open Voice Network is thinking about or thinking about dictating in future?
Yes, and it's again, I can say it's on our roadmap. As you know, we're a young organization, but I'll give you an example. We have an education community comprised of teachers who are looking at how to use voice in the classroom. Voice assistant in the classroom, voice assistant for remote teaching, voice assistants for language teaching. There's a lot of different use cases voice assistants can do, but you have to be very cognizant of the privacy of a child. You're dealing with minors. They've developed some initial lesson plans. Just, this is perhaps how it could be done. And Julie Davis and her colleagues will be taking those out to other teachers, to parents, to those outside the voice community. What do you think? What frightens you about this? What are your concerns about this? And I think it's very appropriate, not appropriate, it's essential in our process. And I'm delighted to see Julie and her colleagues in the education community are doing this, of taking them outside the voice world. Because we may, we're in the voice world, but we're in the broader world. We can't ignore, the broader reality that others, we may be blinded by just the fact that we're familiar with the technology and use it often.
This is a very good use case. And I feel like you brought up a very good point, kids and kids' privacy as well. And that's another topic altogether where companies have been backlash because they were recording kids' voice without consent and things like that. So I'm definitely looking at how Open Voice Network can be of help, defining some of those standards. I had is every company have their own set of branding. So there are two parts to a brand or a company, right? One part is the brand itself. Like, how do I want to be perceived? What are my brand values? What is the brand traits? And all of those things. And on the other spectrum is the strategies, the company strategy. Like, okay, this is my partnership strategy, or this is how we want to do things. Where does the Open Voice Network fit into, the brand and the strategy?
We fit into both. And let me make sure that I'm clear on the definitions. I think a critical part of how the Open Voice Network will assist brands is in two ways. I think the first is we are working toward supporting brands in their ownership of their data. Now, it's again, none of these questions are easy, but in the whole realm of voice, yes, platforms and providers listen to conversations, and there are reasons they do that. They want to ensure the quality of the UX. And they're also gathering information for their training. We get all that. We understand that. Valid concerns. At the same time, it's a very valid concern for a brand. If I'm a brand and Shamal is a consumer, for me as the brand to have a very direct and increasingly close and personal, even to an emotional intimacy between a brand and a customer. Brands take on human qualities. We can be caring, we can be this, we can be that. And so the communication between a brand and a consumer of any type, that needs to be private in our mind. Now, and if we can create a realm of privacy for an explicit request to communicate with the brand, that's one of the things we're working toward, is to help create that. If there is an implicit request, hey, tell me about organic apples. Maybe that's in the realm of a search engine or a platform provider giving you lots of options. But again, when you are speaking directly with a brand, and I, as the brand, my brand tone, my brand presence, how I communicate with you, in a sense, we humanify a brand through voice. We personify a brand through voice. That's going to be critically important. And our communication needs to be carefully protected for the benefit of the brand. A strong belief in that from the Open Voice Network.
Yeah, I feel like that's really important. But how do you think, like nowadays, there are so many companies out there, and you named quite a few of them already, right? There's Alexa, Google, Amazon, Siri, and then Samsung and Ali, and so many other competitors are there, and everyone is trying to fight for the same space. So now this is another big problem. Like consumer is the same for each of these, because anyone who wants to use the voice they will use, but now they have so many choice. Do you feel like by streamlining things now we are giving the user the flexibility to choose, like, hey, you want to go with this one, this has standards, this company values standards, it's following all the processes and all, I would be inclined to go with that brand versus the other brand?
I think that, Shamala, is the bet we're making. That's the hypothesis we have, is that through standards, we give users, standards consistently have given users 3 or 4 things. And they give choice, and they give openness, and eventually they give trust. If I'm a user, do I want to be shifting back and forth between platforms? Let's see, and I close down this platform, but I open this platform, and I go a wake word over here, but a new wake word over here. Or would I simply like to engage my voice assistant and talk to anyone? And my guess is, haven't done a completely quantified study here, but my guess is that most consumers would like just to start talking and then speak to anyone. And those platforms that join with that, those providers that join with that, be they the telecoms, be the platform providers, those are the ones who I think will just be able to say, hey, come to us and the world is yours, versus stay with us inside our walled garden and you can go to whoever we choose for you, versus the world is yours. Because we are open, we are standards based, and we are giving you these values based upon this. That is the opportunity I think that the Open Voice Network provides or offers to the telecoms and the platform providers. It's also, I think, a key value for the consumers and users. especially the enterprises. Build once, use many, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I used to work for a company where we used to do that for, mobile applications back in the days, because exactly we were dealing with the same problem. Like you have Android, you have iOS, you have Palm Pre, you have BlackBerry. Now, if you have to design for each of those, it was so complicated because you had to deal with a different programming language altogether.
Exactly.
What they designed was a solution which was write once, run everywhere. All you do is design the solution in the backend, automatically it converts to the respective programming language, and then it becomes easy for anyone who wants to have the strategy. And pretty much that's what you are leaning towards.
That's what, yeah, that's what we're looking for. And especially the value for the enterprise, as you said, write once, use many. Build once, maintain once, improve once, innovate once, use many. Versus, budget's a little tight this quarter. Should we take care of this or this or this or this or this? Which customers do we wish to lose?
Yeah,
Becomes a question.
that's a very big question, $1 million question.
Yes.
So I was recently talking to a person, and not only one person, I spoke to a couple of people, and I found a pattern which was pretty common, where when we were speaking about privacy, some of them mentioned that, well, you know what, I trust Apple as a brand more when it comes to privacy versus Amazon or Google or any other brand, because I've never heard any news about Apple about hacking or any such things, and they have a very strict privacy rules. So I'll be more willing to trust that brand to do online purchases or voice commerce or things like that than any other brand. So people also have a perception which is tied to a brand in specific. How, because as we start thinking about voice in general, people can do anything and there are so many use cases, right? So now, how will the strategy which you are talking about right now, like right once, or like run or play anywhere kind of thing, fit into the mental model of user who have a trust factor with the brand?
I think it's a great question. I think several things. Number one, if they have a trusted relationship with, let's say, a platform provider, they're a Siri voice person, use them. Great. What we can do is provide, if you will, the super highway that connects you through Siri to all kinds of other things. But if your platform, you trust Siri, you trust Apple, they're very privacy conscious as they are, use them. God bless you. Fantastic. That's great. I think it's the interoperability. I think it's the we've talked about a destination registry, being able to find things, much as you can find destinations and websites through a domain name system. There are a number of things that we'll be doing that I think they're complementary. They're not replacement. They're complementary to what the great work the platforms are doing. I think there's also then the additional focus upon privacy and bringing a higher standard up for everybody, which I think is just part of what a standards body can do, is to say, this is the benchmark and everybody should be there, and especially on questions of personal privacy. But to your point earlier, there's an awful lot of privacy questions, again, about data usage have not been addressed.
There's a lot to do in this field, I guess. There's a lot of things, unknowns, which we have to look at and then design, which is good. So where does designers, I know you mentioned there are 100 plus people contributing into this effort of Open Voice Network, which is good. Like, this community is growing and people are actually leaning towards creating standards. Where does designers' role fit into all of this?
Oh, it's gosh, Shamala, it's an absolute, hey, you designers that are listening here to this great podcast, and thanks, Shamala, for doing this. You're absolutely essential to our work. Are you the MVPs of this? Maybe so, because you're the ones creating voice. People like me can have a vision of maybe where it should go, but the feasibility, the reality, the usability, all must be determined by the designers. And Shamal, as you know so well, it's in the testing and the doing and saying, yeah, that's great in theory, but in practice, that it really doesn't work. That's where the designer community has been so important and so valuable to us. And it has really helped us, I think, be grounded and will continue to keep us grounded. You know, theorists are like balloons, they can fly off, but unless there's a string and pull it back down to the ground, it can get lost very quickly. And I think the developer and the designer communities, both critical in keeping us grounded and making sure that whatever we're talking about is doable and feasible.
I love that analogy, definitely. So, John, if people want to learn more about Open Voice Network and about you, where can they learn?
They can go and find out about the Open Voice Network at www.openvoicenetwork.org. We're their website. They're in the internet. Look for me on LinkedIn. Jon, Jon, it's a funny spelling, and Stine, Stine. It's also a funny spelling. Yeah, Jon Stine, LinkedIn, great place to find me, and I'm there just about every day checking in.
Awesome. So any last thoughts, any last advice for our conversational designers and developer community out there?
One of the interesting things, just here's a point, and it's something that you've inspired me on, so I need to bring it up here, is where are we going? We are facing there's 3 or 4 things that seem to be unfolding. There is a future of independent voice assistance that's beginning to emerge, where we're less about apps on a mobile device, on a mobile platform, and much more about independent sites. That's beginning to happen. We're, contextual based conversation where we're not in the Q&A, command and query. That's beginning to happen. Enterprises using it, much as you're involved with. You look at the Bank of Americas and the Mercedes-Benzes and the Fords and the Capital Ones and Targets and Walmarts, all beginning to use voice. All kinds of things are happening. And the current state will not be the future state. And so we need, as a collective community, to be solving for today, but also taking as best we can, kind of screwing up our eyeballs and putting on our propeller beanies. Where's tomorrow going to be? And that's also part of the Open Voice Network. And for that, we need you and all the developers. Where do you think it's going to go? Advise us, tell us, guide us, criticize us, slap us every now and then, because we'll need it to the benefit of the voice community.
Yeah, no, I think there are many people who would definitely be interested in being part of it in general as well. But you brought up really good points, like, look at it from a different lens altogether, because not everything is good or perfect in this world where we live today. And there's a lot which needs to be streamlined. And this is a great advice. Thank you so much, John, for your time.
No, thank you. Well, thank you for your time and this opportunity. It's a delight, as always.
Yeah, you have a great day.
And you too. Best wishes. Take care.
Thanks for listening today. If you would like to post a voice comment, please go to www.witlingo.com/DAA. That's www.witlingo.com/DAA. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can find all the information on becoming a certified voice interaction designer, along with show notes and more, at our website, digitalassistant.academy. That's digitalassistant.academy. We encourage your feedback and questions. Be sure to get in touch by using the contact page at the Digital Assistant Academy's website. We will include the link in the show notes. In our next episode, Mike Gronuich talks about building block of conservation design, language, and content management. Until next week, take care.